Hello everyone, my name is Ned, and this video is super long. Because of that, I've broken it up into various sections with which you can use to easily find the most important information relevant to you in an effort to not waste your time. With that being said, this video stands as a collection of the overwhelming majority of my knowledge when it comes to creating, configuring, adding to, and running dedicated servers for ARK Survival Evolved. To be clear, this is strictly for the Steam and Epic Games PC platforms. What this means is that this tutorial will only be covering how to create servers for the Steam and Epic versions of the game exclusively. For all other platforms, including the Windows 10 Microsoft Store, Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, and mobile versions, you cannot create servers in this way, and these platforms can't join or work with Steam or Epic. In addition to the platform clarification, I'd like to briefly outline what kind of specs your PC will need beforehand. That way you don't end up creating a server that your PC can't handle running. If you've made it this far, that probably means you're either on Steam or Epic Games. When it comes to creating and hosting servers for these platforms yourself, you have two options. You can either host the server or multiple servers on the PC that you're playing the game on, or you can host them on a secondary PC, which in this case would be dedicated to hosting the server. In general, ARK servers use about 2 to 4 gigabytes of RAM each, meaning that even if you're just running one, 8 gigabytes probably won't cut it if you're trying to play on the same computer that you're hosting on. If you're playing and hosting, I would recommend at least 16 gigabytes of RAM, unless you're running more than one server, which you'll need definitely a lot more for. If you're running servers on a dedicated machine, at least for one server, you'll definitely want at least 8 gigabytes of RAM. But like I said, if you want multiple servers, you're gonna have to gradually kind of scale up the amount of RAM that you have. CPU is also important, though it's sort of hard to clarify what kind of CPU you will need at minimum. So, with those requirements out of the way, let's get on to how to create your server. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is go to the description in the video and you'll find a link to the SteamCMD developer valvesoftware.com. You can also just search SteamCMD in Google, and then you're going to scroll down right here where it says Windows. This is specifically a tutorial for Windows. If you're on Linux, then I am afraid I can't help you with that. But for all the Windows users, you want to click Download SteamCMD for Windows, click here, and then you're going to open SteamCMD. You're going to find a zip file with an exe in it. You're just going to drag this exe onto your desktop, and then we'll go ahead and minimize this for now. Then we want to create a new folder. For now, I'm going to call this SteamCMD. Then I'm going to drag the SteamCMD.exe into the folder. Then I'm going to open SteamCMD.exe. It's going to open a window right here. It's going to download all of the files that it needs for SteamCMD to run properly. So this might take a little bit of time depending on how fast your internet and your storage device are. So once it says type quit to exit, loading Steam API OK, this means that it's done downloading. So now what we're going to do from here on is type login anonymous, just like this. Okay, then we type app_update space 376030 space validate, just like this. And now what this is going to do is essentially download the ARK Survival Evolved dedicated server files. It's going to download these to the downloading folder. As you can see, 376030. Eventually, once it's done downloading, it's going to be essentially moved into this common folder automatically. Oh, it's right here already, actually, ARK Survival Evolved dedicated server. So this is where our server is going to be found, and then we'll sort of go from there. Okay, here we go. So it says success app 376030 fully installed. So I'm just going to type quit, hit enter. It's going to force close the application. Then we're going to go to Steam Apps, Common, ARK Survival Evolved dedicated server. Now keep in mind, every single time that you need to go and access the server itself, it's always going to be through this Steam Apps Common ARK. So basically this is your sort of root SteamCMD directory. This is where you're going to locate the exe. This will, I'll explain this later, but you're eventually going to use this to update the server again whenever you need to update it. It's also used to download other dedicated game servers if you ever want to do that in the future. But we're going to go to Steam Apps and then Common. This is the default location for the server without specifying an install location. So we're going to go to dedicated server, ARK dedicated server, and then shooter game. And then we've got a few things here. We've got binaries. This is the only one we can play with right now since we don't have a saved folder. Binaries, Win64. Okay, then we've got this massive folder with all of these different files. You're going to really neglect pretty much all of these. What you're going to do is create your own. So you're going to right click an empty space here, and go to new, and then text document. And then what you want to do is sort of get out all of the text, and you're going to type, for example, we could just do start underscore the island dot bat or dot bat. And we're going to hit enter. Now, it's either going to say if you change a file name extension, the file might become unusable, or you sure want to change that. It's either going to say that or nothing's going to happen. So I'm going to, if this comes up, you want to click yes. If nothing happens, this is because you don't have file extensions on. So you want to make sure that you go to view and then check this box that says file name extensions. This will allow you to actually see the .txt or .bat at the end of each file, or .dll or .exe. As you can see, this should allow you to actually edit the names and the full file name extension themselves as well. So once you've got this, you want to right click on it and then click edit. And this is going to open a notepad file from which you can edit. So I'm going to have some text in the description that you can paste into this document yourself, but I'm going to write them all out here just so that you can understand them fully. Okay, so first I'm going to type start ShooterGameServer.exe. Then we're going to start a quotation. You don't have to type this in character for character. You can just go ahead and paste it in from the description, of course. But I'm going to start the quotation. This is where the brunt of the command line is going to be, and then we're going to have some parameters at the end. But we're going to have the map name first. This is what we're going to specify first. So the map name, it's going to be, so there are 9 official maps in ARK right now. There's the Island, Scorched Earth, Aberration, Extinction, Genesis, The Center, Ragnarok, Valguero, Crystal Isles, and then soon, in just about 2 months from the point of this video being recorded, there's going to be Genesis 2, presumably, unless it gets delayed, and then there may be another non-story map that comes after it, making it a total of either 10 or 11 maps in total. So right now I can tell you the names of each of the current maps. We've got the Island, then we've got Scorched Earth _P, we've got Aberration _P, then we've got Extinction, Genesis, The Center, then Ragnarok, Valguero _P, and lastly we've got Crystal Isles, just like this. So these are the current 9 official maps, and that these are their sort of command line names. So I don't exactly know why they have the P after it. It probably has something to do with the fact that they're paid, but Valguero isn't actually paid for. You don't have to pay for this one, it's free, so I'm not entirely sure, but this is exactly what you need to type for the map name for each of these if you want to have a Genesis server, or if you want to have a Valguero server, or a Scorched Earth server, and so on. So in this example, I'm going to use the Island. So we're going to type the Island, okay? Then we're going to do a question mark. The question mark essentially separates each parameter into its own area. So then we're going to start another command. We're going to do session name. We're just going to do session name, and then I'll call this tutorial server. Okay. Then, and it can have spaces. So let's say tutorial server 2, right? And then we're going to have a question mark. We're going to do MaxPlayers equals, and by the way, I'm going to have this probably as blank in the description instead of tutorial server 2, just so that you sort of know what to change. I might have it as ChangeMe instead. Then we're going to have MaxPlayers. I'm going to set this to let's say 35. Then we're going to do question mark again, OverrideOfficialDifficulty equals 5.0. Now what this does is essentially it sets the levels, or the difficulty of wild dinos, to 5, which means that creatures, assuming the difficulty offset is also set to 1, which I'm going to do here, 1. Assuming this is also the case, this will allow creatures to spawn up to 150, at least normal creatures, and then other creatures like tech dinos can spawn up to, I believe, 180, and then wyverns and rock drakes can spawn up to 190. This is the standard on official servers, so if you'd like to use it, you can certainly use it. Otherwise, you can just get it out of the way. Then we're going to do question mark AltSaveDirectoryName, and I'm going to do equals just the island for now. This is going to clarify the name of the save folder because I like to separate them even if I'm not intending on running a cluster, because it just makes it easier. You know exactly, you can sort of differentiate each save folder very easily and sort of have them all organized in that way. AltSaveDirectoryName essentially just specifies the name of the folder, of the save folder specifically. So it makes it really easy to organize your saves. You're going to need it if you at any point plan on having a cluster. Then we've got QueryPort. Now, we're going to be messing with ports and query ports in this tutorial. There's going to be a later section on port forwarding, but for now, we can just go with the default. We're going to go with 27015. Then we're going to do $port equals 7777. Okay. For now, just stick with me. I'll sort of explain these in a second. And then the last thing you want to add after this is just listen. You don't have to add this last necessarily, but this is just sort of these are the most important parameters that I've thought of adding, at least within the quotations. I'm going to add a few after this, but hopefully you understand all of these completely and I explained them well. If not, it's more or less okay. You don't have to understand them completely. On the end here, I'm going to add a couple things. So first, I'm going to do -NoBattlEye. It's weird. You have to spell it with the E in battle is also the E in I. It's a little weird. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because BattleEye functionally is a little bit glitchy when it comes to the Epic Games version of ARK. They may have since fixed this, but at least as far as I understand it, it's still a little buggy in regards to Epic. You can certainly go without disabling it. You can certainly try having it on, especially if you're on Steam. You shouldn't have any issues, but it may result in issues, so I would recommend perhaps turning it off. That's how my servers have it, at least. Then I'm going to add NoTransferFromFiltering. Now, I actually don't know what this does, but on the ARK server configuration wiki, it recommends having it. It doesn't even clarify why. So functionally, I can't find any information about it, but I've always had it for my clusters specifically. If you're not planning on having a cluster, you definitely don't need this. But if you do, then I would recommend adding it just because I think it may make it to where your cluster is sort of isolated to sort of like a cross arc unofficial. If it doesn't do that, I don't know exactly what it is. Now, this next setting is also for clusters. It's going to be -cluster ID and then equals. We can just set this to anything we want, like tree 565948 something 665, right? This is just a unique ID. Now, if you don't plan on having a cluster, which I'm going to be covering later in the video, it's essentially a string of servers. If you don't plan on having this, you don't need to include this or this in the command line. So don't even worry about them. Then we're going to have -activeEvent. And this is in fact with 2 E's, so active event. What this allows you to do is specify which event is on the server. So for example, we could do Winter Wonderland. I think it might be Winter Wonderland 5, I forget. I don't know if you can activate events after they've already ended. You may be able to, but whenever they're not on, I would recommend having this in your command line anyways, because if you want to mess with events, you can always just have this already here, and then you can just change it from none, which is the default where no event is active. You can just change the none to, you know, for example, Valentine's Day, or, you know, whatever the event may be, excellent adventure, right? Whichever event it may be, it should specify whenever the announcements are made. We're almost done with this command line part. I'm just going to add, so UseVivox. Vivox is a sort of newer voice command system that was added with the Epic Games update. You can choose to use this if you want. It's not necessary at all. I just have it on my own servers. Then we're going to use -noundermeshkilling. Now, what this does is it prevents people from dying immediately just because they go under the mesh. It doesn't allow them to die from kill zones. So there you go. These are the main parameters that I personally use. You probably could have skipped a lot of these, especially if you're not planning on using a cluster, but this is more or less how I would recommend having your command line, unless you are not at all planning on having a cluster, in which case you really don't need these 2 parameters right here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. That's saved. I'm going to close out of it. And now all I'm going to do is start the bat file up. Okay, so we've got the batch file opened right now, and what it's displaying here is just a black console with some interesting text. Nothing particularly exciting is going on right now. It's showing the ARK version, which for me right now is 321.1. Over time, you all are going to see drastically larger numbers right here, depending on at which point you're watching this video. You just want to wait here for a while. Essentially what the server is doing right now is it's working out how to create the save. And so if you notice, we're going to go back to Shooter Game, you'll notice there's a new folder here called saved. And what a lot of people didn't realize in my last video is that the saved folder does not exist until you've started up the server via the batch file, because it doesn't actually have to exist, because the saved folder stores information about your own server that you've just started up, how it's going to be configured and how the save is going to be, the save itself, where the dinosaurs are, where the players are, and so on. Once the server is up, there's going to be a folder right here called the island, or whatever you happen to name it in the AltSaveDirectory parameter within the command line. For now, I'm going to go to config, Windows Server, and just briefly explain this while the server starts up. So there's two INI files right here that you will likely be messing with if you care to change the settings at all. Game.ini starts off empty, there's nothing in here. You can use this INI file to add in new information that changes and configures certain things within the game. I'm going to go into greater detail about this later on. Then we've got the game user settings.ini. Strangely, this has a lot of client-side information, which obviously the server isn't using. For the most part, this stuff here is really irrelevant, but we can't really delete it because it's just going to come back. So for now, I'm just going to leave this alone. This is also where a lot of configuration settings are stored that you will have to implement yourself for the most part. So now I'm just going to let this sit for a while, and we're going to allow the server to start up, and then I'll be right back once that is done. Okay, so we're back here. We've got the server it's up and running at this moment. So the reason I know that is because, well, first a bunch of text has sort of appeared here, but we've got primal game data took and then X amount of seconds. Steam socket, open source, get hostname failed. Do not worry if you see this. This is a meaningless message. It doesn't mean anything. We're going to see it print again here. And then we've got server tutorial server 2 has successfully started. Now, as you can see, for me, full startup from not having a save file to creating the entire thing took 314 seconds. Now, this is obviously only 5 minutes, but for you, it may take a lot longer, or it might take a lot less time. It really just depends on the speed of the storage device that you're running the server on. Okay, so now that the server is up, I'm going to actually show you how to join. First, I'm going to show you how to join on Steam. So we're going to go up to the top here, we're going to click View, and then Servers. If you haven't been on the Servers section of Steam before, you're going to be on this Internet tab. Then you want to click Favorites, okay, and then you want to click Add a Server. And so this allows you to add a server to your favorites, of course. In this case, we're going to try a few different things. So the IP that you're going to want to add is going to be dependent on whether or not you have NAT loopback and or whether or not you've port forwarded. These are not super important right this second, but in the meantime, you should be able to type localhost :27015, assuming that's the query port that you used in the command line. If you used a different one, then use that one instead of this. Then we're going to click add this address to favorites. And as you can see, we've got tutorial server 2. If it doesn't show up and it just shows some kind of random IP instead, and you refresh and you don't see it, including the fact that the server still says up, then you want to click add a server again, and you're going to instead go to start, type cmd. You're going to have your command prompt right here. You want to type ipconfig, hit enter, and then you're going to see your local IP or your IPv4 address. One of them. There may be multiple, there should only really be one, and then you're going to type that one instead. So let's say 192.168.1.65 or something, right? And then :27015 or whatever query port used. You can also try adding this. If that doesn't work, then the server likely just isn't up, or you can lastly try using your public IP. You can get your public IP by going to Google, searching ipchicken.com. or just ipchicken. And then you want to go to ipchicken, what is my IP address? And it's going to show some information right here. I've got this blanked out, but regardless, you're going to want to copy the blue IP, and then you can go ahead and paste that into here. So, bam. And if that still doesn't work, then the server probably isn't up, or you don't have internet connection, or there's something very, very wrong. Regardless, I see my server here, so I'm going to show you how to actually join. So you don't actually want to right click and click connect to server, because it's usually not going to actually allow you to connect. If you click view server info, you're very likely to see server is not currently playing on any game server. Instead, you want to open ARK itself. Now that we're on ARK, I'm going to click join ARK right here. And then as you can see, I see my tutorial server right here. I'm going to go down to join. If you encounter an issue where it doesn't let you join directly from your favorites, if it says unable to query server info for invite or something like that, you're going to need to update your server, though you shouldn't theoretically get that assuming you've got the right IP port added and the server is in fact up. And here we go. I've successfully joined. I'm going to call myself Ned, create new survivor, and there we go. We are in ARK, indeed. Okay. Now that that works and everything's good, I'm going to go ahead and exit to main menu, and let's get back to the rest of the tutorial. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to join on Epic Games, but first, before we do that, we need to make sure that the server is compatible with Epic Games and allows for crossplay between the Steam and Epic versions. What we're going to do is go back to the batch file, which remember is found inside of the shooter game, binaries, Win64, and just remember this is where you're always going to have your batch file, and then later on if you want you can have plugins, which you're going to have your ARK API folder in here. Regardless, that's not necessary at all, that's just a side note. Inside of the batch file again, let's see here, crossplay. Okay, so we don't actually have crossplay, so I'm going to go ahead and add that to the end of the command line, -crossplay. This is only for allowing Epic players to join. If you don't want Epic players to join, or you don't want to add functionality for it, you don't have to add this to your batch file. This is just for that function. Okay, then I'm going to save it, and keep in mind changes don't apply immediately, whether they're in the INI files or in the batch files, so we're going to have to restart the server in order for the change to go into effect. Now, to shut down or restart the server, you can simply just click on the X once, and this will more or less just do a do exit command. It typically will save the world beforehand, so you don't have to worry about that method causing any issues, though I would always recommend using rcon or an admin command in game to save the world beforehand, since it's generally a little bit safer than just hard closing out, but it's not a huge deal if you need to. I know I ran my servers for months just simply closing them out. Just make sure you don't sort of force close it with Task Manager or try to really close it as fast as possible, because it might not save properly in those cases. So I'm starting the batch file back up, and while it's starting up, I'm going to just go ahead and launch the Epic version of the game. Okay, now that we're on the Epic Games version, I'm going to go ahead and click Join ARK again, and let's say we have nothing in our favorites, like in this example. So to find the server, you want to go to the, now this is assuming you've port forwarded. We're going to go to the unofficial server session filter, and then I'm going to search for the name of my server, in this case tutorial server 2. Okay, now I can see my server here. If you are able to favorite it and you have it in your server list, then you can join it directly from there, but if not, then you want to go to host/local, and then let's say I'll just join the island, for example, play single player. From here we're going to open the server console, and we're going to type open and then space and then the IP of the server. So in this case we could just either do the IPv4, which for you may be 192.168.1.70, or you know, something on that along those lines, 10.0.0.1.7, or you know, whatever it may be. But in this case I'm going to type open, and then you can try localhost and then :27015, or whatever QueryPort you use. Now typing this should directly load you in. If that doesn't work, then there may be some extra issue, which you may be able to find help for in the comment section. So I've just shut down the server. I'm going to go through a couple of the most frequently asked questions on the first video, the original that got over 100,000 views. These are the most common questions, the most frequent questions, and so I figure answering a dozen of these should help some of you that are still having issues. Okay, so let's say that when you start up your server at the top of the console, it says create bound socket, bind, couldn't find an open port between, you know, this port and the same port. This means that the port that you're trying to run the server on is either already open in the background or you're currently running a server with it. So you need to either close the server, or if you don't see it, restart your computer. Okay, now the second question is in regard to Steam CMD. So let's say you're trying to download an update, you're trying to do the app_update 376030, and then it says instead, error app 376030, state is 0x602 or 0x202 after update job. This means that the storage device you're trying to install the server on doesn't have enough space, so you need to install it elsewhere or free up some space. Alright, question 3 is, why don't I have a saved folder? This is, like I said in the beginning, because you have not created a server yet, you haven't run the server, you need to, like I said, go into binaries, Win64, you need to start up the server successfully at least once in order for the save folder to be created. Alright, now question 4 is, how do you update the server? So for this, we're going to go back to Steam CMD, we're going to go ahead and open it, and then we're going to just do the exact same thing that we did before. So login anonymous, and then app_update 376030 validate. This is going to force an update to happen. Just make sure that the servers are, if you're running multiple or if you're just running one, make sure they're all shut down. That way you don't update and attempt to write to the disk with new information while the server is online. Now, question 5 is, what are all of the current official map names? So first one is the island. Let's say the island Scorched Earth _P, Aberration _P, Extinction, Genesis, the Center, Ragnarok, Valgero _P, and then Crystal Isles. These are all of the names that you're going to put in your batch file for each respective server or each respective map. Now, do keep in mind, in the future, you're going to have to look up what the map names are. I will not have these in the video itself, of course, because these maps are not a thing, but presumably, well, we already know there's going to be Genesis, so it might be Genesis 2, and then another map name, like for example, I wouldn't speculate at all, but there may be another non-story map. We don't exactly know for sure. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too long. Those are all of the main FAQ questions. Now I'm going to briefly sort of explain how to port forward. What is port forwarding? Why do we need to know this for creating an ARK server? And why does it sound so daunting? So I'm going to use paint.net to basically explain. Okay, so we've got a house here. This is a very poor illustration. Okay, and a door. Also, my voice is getting super hoarse, so I'm gonna have to do this quick. This is a house. This is your house, okay? And you've got your router here. This is what gives you internet along with your modem. Then you've got your neighbor's house over here. Let's say your neighbor wants to play ARK with you. And so let's say your neighbor wants to play ARK with you, but they don't have the same internet as you. They have their own router. And so in order to actually connect to your server, you need to open your router up via port forwarding, via opening certain ports, specifically the ports that ARK uses. Once these are open, the other person, whether that's your neighbor or someone across the world, they can join your server, assuming everything's good on their end. They don't have to port forward, it's just you, it's just the host that needs to port forward. Now, what does port forwarding look like? Do we do this in ARK? No, we don't do this in ARK. We have to port forward using our router's dashboard. Some routers will require that you use their app or their specific website, but if you don't know for sure, what you want to do is go to Start, type CMD, and then open the command prompt right here. And then you're going to type ipconfig, hit enter. This is going to display some information, specifically some information about what your IPv4 address is and what your default gateway is. So once we've brought this up and we can see our IPv4 and default gateway, all we have to do is go to the URL bar, and then we're going to type in our default gateway. So for me, I have a Netgear router, and so my default gateway is 192.168.1.1. So I'm going to go ahead and type that into to Google Chrome here, and then I'm going to hit enter. As you can see, it brings me to this dashboard here. It's not much of a dashboard, it's just a sign in. So it's usually going to ask you to log into something. Now, your username will, by default, it'll likely be something like admin. I would at least try this. And then for the password, I would try password. If this doesn't work, you want to look up the different passwords for your router specifically. And so let's say you've got a Linksys router. So right here, I just search Linksys default logins. Linksys is the name of a specific type of router. So they've got a default password list. And as you can see, this is sort of associated with the model. So for example, default username, strangely this one has none, but in this case there's admin, and then default password is also admin. So you're gonna use this to log into your dashboard. I'm gonna sign into mine. A lot of this is going to be blanked out, just whatever I feel is probably too personal to show you. But in this case, I'm gonna go to advanced, and then advanced setup. And my voice is breaking. I'm really sorry about this. I hope you can still understand me. Then we're going to go to port forwarding and port triggering. And as you can see, there's a huge list of things that I've added here. Now, you may have a totally different user interface for your router dashboard, and so you may actually have to look up how to port forward for yours specifically. But for me, all I have to do is click Add Custom Service, and then it's going to take me to a new page where I can add a few things. So service name, there might be a name thing. I usually just go by the port that I'm adding. So in this case, I'm going to add 2715, which is the default query port that we're using for our test server. And so then we've got the service type. You're likely going to be able to choose from a list of TCP and or UDP. Always go with both of these in this case. Then for the external starting port, it may not be called external starting port or ending port. It may be called something completely different, but it's generally going to follow along the lines of some kind of port 1, port 2, maybe even a port 3 and port 4. So in all of these boxes, you want to enter 27015, assuming this is for the same service, 27015, and then we've got these entered in both boxes. Then I've got these blanked out right here, but this is showing the IPv4s of all of the devices connected to my router. And so you might not have this, but you want to essentially find the IPv4, which, like I said, is right here, and then make sure that it's typed in here. You may not have to do this. You might just be able to select it from this list. But then normally I just click apply. I think I already have this port added though, so I'm not going to add it in this case. What you want to do after you've added this port is you want to go through the process of clicking add another one. So you want to add a brand new port or another service. And in this case, we're going to do 7777. And then for the starting port, or port 1, we're going to do 7777 again, and then that again. In each port box, and then make sure you've got the right IPv4 again, and then we'll add that one too. Now that's really all you need to do for now. One thing I do want to clarify before we move on from port forwarding is that sometimes you may need to restart the router to apply the changes. Most of the time you don't have to. Also, you may find something called port triggering alongside port forwarding. Port triggering is sort of I don't entirely understand what port triggering is, but to my knowledge, it's sort of a temporary version of port forwarding. So in all instances, you want to use port forwarding instead if you're trying to port forward for your servers. Now, some of you may be wondering why we use these ports and what is the utility in using them. Why 27015? Why 7777? I was also wondering this recently because it's always been a standard that I've followed suit with. It's sort of what I taught myself to understand and use was always just, we start the query port with 27015. If we have another server, then we have the query port for that server be 27016, and then 17, 18, 19, and so on. This Redditor right here, I'm not saying he's completely right, but he did give the explanation that the range of ports is from 0 to 65535, though you shouldn't use ports above 40,000 or 400, because they're reserved on some operating systems, and you should always check whether a port is commonly used by another service. I definitely agree with this. You definitely want to make sure that you're not using a port that is commonly used by other games, potentially, like for example, Minecraft or 7 Days to Die. But yeah, so theoretically, the query port for the server could probably be anything that has 5 digits, but I would personally go with just the standard, starting with 27015 is the query port, and then, 777 for the port itself. Though, like I said, it shouldn't be necessary according to what they said, assuming this is true. Okay, now that we're done with port forwarding, assuming you've added these ports, then you should be good, and the server should be visible from outside your network. People should be able to join, and they're going to join via your public IP. Remember, they can get your public IP by you going to IP chicken. I don't know why we see a bunch of chicken, but you're going to go to IP chicken, and then again, you're going to find your public IP, copy this, and then send this to your friends. They're going to join the same way you did. They're going to have to use your public IP. They can't use localhost because that would point them to their own network. That would point them to their own PC. But yeah, so they're just going to use this public IP and in Steam when they're adding it to their favorites, and then call in, 270, whatever you make it. Okay, that was a mouthful, but that is how to port forward and the sort of specifics of port forwarding for ARK and why we do the things that we do sort of vaguely. At this point, I'm going to teach you all how to create clusters. What are clusters? How do they work? And why should we care about them? Okay, so this is a good example or a good way for me to explain how clusters work. So as you can see, this is Scorched Earth right here. May not be completely obvious depending on how new to ARK you are, but this is the Scorched Earth map. This is the island map, and then this is Aberration way back here. And so this is relevant because a cluster is essentially a group of servers that can either be on different maps or they can all be on the same map that are essentially strung together and able to be transferred between. People can transfer their characters, their items, and even their creatures. So let's say you've got Island 1, Island 2, Scorched 1, Scorched 2, and then Aberration, right? Aberration sort of by itself. This is a very possible cluster that could exist. So how do we actually do this? First, you need to make sure that the computer you're running these servers on has enough RAM to be able to run all these servers, because remember, each server takes up roughly 2 to 4 gigabytes of RAM, and so if you actually multiply this, let's say they each take 4 gigabytes of RAM, you're dealing with 20 gigabytes of RAM in total that need to be freed up, and this is a lot to allocate. And so if you wanted to host all 5 servers and be playing the game all on the same computer, you're going to need at least 32 gigs of RAM if you want to be safe. So assuming you have all of that, we're going to go to the dedicated server, shooter game, binaries, Win64. And then all we have to do is really just take our batch file from our singular server, copy, and then paste that. Now we've got 2 of them. So I'm going to rename this to the island, start and then Scorched Earth. .bat. Now in this example, if we wanted to literally have 2 islands and 2 Scorched Earth, which nobody in the right mind should probably have 2 of the same map, generally, unless it's for a very specific reason, since typically the reason people have clusters is for extra diversity of having, including a bunch of totally different maps. But if someone wanted to have, say, 2 islands and 2 Scorched Earths, we could definitely do that. In this example, I'm just going to create the 3rd one. So we're just going to have a cluster of 3 servers, and we'll have Aberration here. So as you can see, these are just copies, and so they're going to contain the exact same text that I had in the first one, in the island one. Now, we don't have to change everything. All we need to change is the map name. So in this case, this is the Scorched Earth one, so I'm going to do Scorched Earth _P. And then for the session name, we can keep it the same, or we can change it to include Scorched Earth on the end, perhaps. This is not necessary, though. It can definitely be the same if you want, though it might be a little confusing to sort of switch over to know which one you're joining. You can change these things as well if you'd like. You definitely want to make sure that you change the AltSaveDirectoryName to Scorched Earth. That way we don't have these save files sort of combining and conflicting and doing all kinds of bad stuff. Now, what you also will need to change is the QueryPort and port. So generally, for more servers, you're just essentially going to add an extra port. You could totally go with some random, or maybe not random, but a much larger number like 30060 or something like that. But in this case, just to make it simple, I'm going to just add another number to the query port. So island was 27015. This is going to be 27016. And then for the port, I'm going to add 7778. Now, the wiki does advise right here, if you check out the dedicated server setup Gamepedia, you'll see that it has this section about raw UDP socket port. We can ignore Archon for now, this is optional. But of course we've got, the query port here, the game client port, 77. But then we've also got raw UDP socket port, 7778 already added here. So this is not necessary. Strangely, this is always listed as being sort of important, but I don't exactly know why it is here. I was able to run servers for many months without having this extra sort of third port, but if you want to add it like I have just in case, what you can do is for the first server, for the island, let's say, you're gonna have, so here I'll write this in a separate notepad. So what you can do is, let's say for the island, you've got 27014 or 27015 as the query port. Then we've got 777 as the game client port. Then, for example, you can just have this extra port open. You don't need to type it anywhere in the command line. You can just have it open extra. Well, it's called the raw UDP socket port. raw UDP socket port. And this is just the game client +1, right? And so you can have this if you want. So in that case, what we would directly follow then from is on, let's say, Scorched Earth, we would have 27016 QueryPort 7777 as the game client, or no, and then we'd have 7779 as the game client port, and then we'd have 7780 as the raw UDP socket port for Scorched Earth, right? So we could either do this, or we could do it with just having 2 open per server. It's not entirely necessary having these, like I said, but if you want to add them, you certainly can. That's what I've done just to be safe, since I don't actually know why it's included here, but it just is. So I've just sort of done it anyways myself. In this specific tutorial, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to have it 27016, 7778, and then you're going to want to make sure this cluster ID part is really important. So you want to make sure this is the same cluster ID that you have in the island. If you don't already have it in the command line, make sure that you've added it. By the way, if whenever I say command line, if it's not totally clear what that is, just to let you know, the command line is essentially the text or the file right here that contains all of this text or essentially the command line is essentially the text that the server starts with. It's the sort of line of command that directly tells the server how we start up, what we start with, what we override the INI files with. Essentially, that's the purpose of the command line. Okay, so that's pretty much done here. We've got that changed. Now we're going to head over to aberration. And so this is also really simple. For the net map name, we're going to have aberration_p. And then for the session name, we can just add on aberration to this, for example. And then we can just do AltSaveDirectoryName aberration, QueryPort. We're going to do 27017 and 9. And remember, this is without using the extra raw game data port thing. And then remember, keep the cluster ID the same. And aside from that, we're good. And then we can start up each of these servers. So let's say I started up the island and then Scorched Earth and aberration. So now that we've got these sorted out, we've got each of these batch files up. Essentially what it's going to do is once I start this up, it's just going to load from the save right here, right? It's already created. But then once I start these up, once I start up the Scorched Earth and aberration, they're going to take a little bit longer and of course create their own versions of the island save called, Scorched Earth and then aberration. And so as you can see, within these saved folders, they contain a little bit of information about the players who have joined, and then there's usually some backup saves that are created. Now, what you're also going to have to do is add these servers to your favorites as well. So you'll want to make sure you're just going to go through the same method, the same IP that you would normally use, so localhost or your public IP or your IPv4, and then colon, and then let's say in this example, Scorched Earth, we would do, what I added was 27016 for Scorched Earth, add this to our favorites, and then for aberration I did 17, and so I would just add these both to my favorites as well. You may have noticed these servers, these are also in their own cluster. This is Vanilla Evolved. It is a server cluster that I run, and so I'm going to use these as an example to show you how transferring within the cluster works. Okay, so I'm going to head over to an obelisk, since this is the method, one of the methods through which you're going to transfer to other servers. You can also use supply drops like that one right over there, or tech transmitter, or perhaps other methods on other maps, city terminals. There's all kinds of different ways to transfer, but regardless, going to head over to a terminal and or whatever method you're using, and then you'll click travel to another server. And this should, assuming you've got your DNS addresses set up properly, which isn't something that I covered or will cover in this video, but you should be able to see these servers. Now, if you're the host and you don't see the servers, but players on the server do, then there may be an issue with NAT loopback, which you will have to deal with within your router dashboard. Now, as you can see, I see 8 servers right here. This is because I'm on technically the 9th one, or the island, which isn't showing. And so I can transfer to any of these if I so choose to. And so I'll just simply click, let's say Crystal Isles, and then click join with Survivor. And then essentially it's going to take my character it's going to take my character and upload them and any items on them. In this case, I don't have anything, but it's going to take me up to the ARK system and upload me to the other server. and then I can download my character back onto that server. Just make sure that you don't have another character on that server already, because it'll give you the option to overwrite them, or to either play on that character that's already on the server you're transferring to and sort of upload your current character to the limbo, or directly overwrite and replace that character. So just be really careful if you already have a character on the map that you are transferring to. So now that I've explained how to create your servers, some of the most frequently asked questions, how to port forward, how to enable crossplay, and how to create clusters. Lastly, I'm going to explain how to configure your server, how to install mods, and how to install plugins. So there's 3 ways in which you can configure your server. There's either the command line, which, like I said before, this is the batch file. This is the text in here. And you can change a few things by adding them here. For example, the QueryPort. This is technically a setting that you can change within the INI file, one of the INI files, but alternatively you can add it in the command line instead, which you'll need to do if you have multiple maps that you can tell each server or each map instance which port to use. And then you've also got different kinds of parameters that use a dash and don't go inside the quotation marks. But the typical way that you're going to be configuring your server, if you so choose to, is through the INI files. So we're going to go to our saved folder, which remember is created when you start up the servers, and then you want to go to config, Windows Server, and then you're going to have all of these. The only 2 ones that you're going to need to worry about are the game and game user settings.ini. Let's start with the game user settings.ini. This one is probably the most simple to deal with, even though it has a bunch of text and it might look really confusing. Don't worry about all this stuff. It's all pretty much useless. You don't want to erase it since it's just going to come back, like I said, but it doesn't mean anything. It's just client-side stuff that for some reason exists in the server. Down here we've got session name. If you already have this clarified in the batch file, there's no point in changing it. Also MaxPlayers, you don't need to worry about changing this if you already have it in the command line. Now right here, you're going to notice a bunch of server settings. What you're going to want to do in order to understand what to change in here and or what to add is to go to this website here. Now in here, this wiki is a lifesaver and it's going to teach you a lot if you just take the time to read it. Now, something you want to watch out for is this INI generator. It's not malicious, but this generator does not help, at least in my opinion. It doesn't help to really understand what the settings do when you can simply just read their purpose or their effect in the server wiki. If you do want to use this generator and you happen to select all of these, what it'll do is, if we go all the way down here, create a file, download, it's going to give us this massive wall of text, which is technically, these are all settings and they're all fine and dandy, but if we just copy this and paste it into our game user settings INI, a lot of these are going to override previous ones in here because a lot of them will have been already repeated. And then we've got things down here like, for example, MaxPlayers, message of the day, which don't belong here, they belong down here. So in any case, to save you a bunch of confusion, please do not use the INI generators. Just do it the sort of more laid back way where you're just picking and choosing which settings you want to change. So with that being said, let's start with the command line arguments. Let's do something basic like allow anyone baby imprint cuddle. So I'm going to set aside the INI files for a second, go into binaries Win64. Let's go back to our batch file, since this is, of course, a command line argument. So we can add this to the end if we want. So for example, I'm just going to copy this whole thing, and you can see the effect right here. It says use this if you want anyone to be able to take care of a baby dino through cuddle, not just whoever imprinted on it. And so let's go here. We're going to paste this right here. As you can see, the question mark separates it and it clarifies that it's a new argument. And then we have allow anyone baby imprint cuddle equals true. You don't have to worry about putting question marks to end these since there's nothing after it, and we've just got the end of the whole area here with the end of the quotation mark. So this is how you add the first type of command line argument. And then if you want to add the types that start with the dash, like for example, if you wanted to use, let's say dash insecure, this will disable Valve anti-cheat system or VAC. let's say we want to use this for some reason. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it since you don't actually need to, unlike BattleEye, which sort of can be glitchy. To my knowledge, VAC doesn't actually do anything weird like BattleEye does. But let's say we would just add it here, and it's just simply you separate each one of these with the space, and then they always start with a dash. And then we would just save this, and there we go. So that's how you add to the command line arguments. And let's go down to the game user settings, configuration, down here. Okay, so we're going to start with the game user settings.ini. So as you can see, when the server starts up, it's going to create a few of these INI settings itself. So for example, and some of them it'll directly place in via the command line, depending on the argument set in the command line. So for example, in the command line, we already have difficulty offset equals 1.0. So by extension, the game user settings.ini uses this because the command line forces it to. Then we've got, for example, these are added by default. These, as you can see, weren't added in the command line. This is just one of the default settings. So show map player location equals true. For dedicated servers, this is on. So is third person player, server crosshair, ARK on port, things like this. Now, if you want to add a game user settings.ini setting, let's say day cycle speed scale. So this is a value type. It's a float, meaning that it's just essentially it's an integer with a decimal point, right? So by default, and this is the default here, it's 1.0. And so we're going to go to the game user settings. We're going to make sure that it already doesn't have a clarification here. So just to make sure, let's see, I don't see any day cycle speed scale. All right, so it doesn't already exist. So I'm just going to add it here. Then we're going to do equals, let's say 1.0, or well, making it to 1.0 wouldn't actually be any different from the default, and so there wouldn't really be a point in adding it. So for example, I'll set this to 3.0, right? So the speed at which specifies the scaling factor of the passage of time in the ARK, right? So the speed at which time progresses on the in-game clock with the day-night cycle is going to be 3 times as fast if I set this to be the case. Just remember, if you're confused about what a setting does, it should tell you in here. And if you don't entirely understand, you can click on sometimes there will be a patch when it was added, and it'll clarify further what it means. So PVE dyno decay period, PVE dyno decay. In this example, it doesn't actually tell us, but in a lot of them it does, and you should be able to look it up further if it still doesn't tell you what it means. So that's the game user settings. Then let's go down to the game.ini. This might be a little bit more complicated, or it might look a little bit more complicated, but it's generally pretty basic. As you can see right here, it says the following options can only be set in the script shooter game mode section of game.ini. What this means is that we need to copy this section right here and then go to our shooter game, saved, config, Windows Server, head to the game.ini. Then we're going to paste this right here. This just essentially tells the game.ini that this is in fact going under this section so that it can properly recognize the parameters that we're going to give it. Now, let's say I'm looking through these and I find, okay, well, let's see, egg hatch speed multiplier, this one. I want to use this one. And so, as you can see, it says higher numbers decreases by percentage time needed for fertilized egg to hatch. And this is also a float. So we've got egg hatch speed multiplier equals, and then by default it's 1.0. If we set this to 10, for example, or 10.0, this would make all eggs hatch at 10 times the speed. If we did 1,000, it would be 1,000 times the speed. You get the idea. We can do this with many different settings in the game.ini. Just make sure that they're all under this script shooter game mode sort of section in the brackets. Now, one interesting thing that you can do with the game.ini that the game user settings can't do is that there are certain settings or parameters that exist in here that can do somewhat more unique things than the game user settings can do. It just reaches a different part of the game. I think I'm not entirely sure what it is, but for example, in this case, we can make it so that, for example, the Mega Megalodon or Alpha Megalodon takes twice as much damage, or actually, in this case, for Dino class damage multiplier, it outputs half the damage. So this is set to 0.5, so it does 50% of the damage it normally would. And then Dino class resistance, which means that it takes twice as much damage. If you set this to a lower number, it will take more damage, and if you set it to a high number, it'll take less damage. And so this is useful for if you want to nerf creatures. On my server, we have alphas set to this essentially half. Alphas are basically 2 times easier. We've got bosses 3 times easier, just things like that where you can sort of tweak these things yourself if you so choose to. And that's sort of how you change these settings. Of course, if you have any questions, you should be able to find the answers in this server configuration wiki. This video is probably super long at this point, but regardless, now I'm going to go over how to install mods. So mods are a bit of a different beast entirely, and so I'm going to try my best to quickly explain this. To use mods, you have to be using the Steam version. Epic Games cannot use mods, they can't join servers with mods. So what we need to do first is install our mods on Steam. So let's go to the workshop, and then we're going to go to, we can find a mod, install it. In this case, I already have 3 mods. I've got additional emotes, structures plus, and this Explorer Notes map. Let's say we want to use the structures plus mod and the additional emotes. And so first I'm going to subscribe to them, which I've already done here. And then I'm going to open ARK. Okay, so ARK is up. I'm going to click host/local. And then as you can see, I've got these 2 mods right here. All you need to do is, if you've installed them for the first time, it should say installing mods right down here. And then you want to go to host/local. And as long as you can see the 2 mods here, you should be fine. They should be fully installed. And if you don't see it down here anymore, then they should be good. You can then just quit the game once they're fully installed. Then what we're going to do is head over to Steam, right click on the game, click properties, and then it's going to open this window right here. We're going to click local files, browse. Okay, then we'll find our root Steam install version of ARK, the actual game itself. Then we want to go to Shooter Game, Content, and we're going to head over to the mods folder. As you can see, there's a ton of leftover mod folders that I have from mods that I've installed in the past, but were never deleted by the game. You want to bring this up parallel to the server. Remember, you want to very clearly differentiate these. This is from my ARK install of the game itself, and then this is the server. They look really similar. If you go to the shooter game, be very careful not to confuse them. You want to, definitely be very clear. This is the client, this is the server. So we're going to go to content, mods again, and in this case we're going to go to content and mods as well. And then what we need to do is, as you can see, there's a few folders with a bunch of, for me, as I said, I have a bunch of mods, but we want to find the exact ID of the mods we're trying to use. And so in this case, let's go over to subscribed items. In this case, we're trying to use structures plus and additional emotes. So right here it says mod ID, it'll tell us exactly. And so for example, if I copy this and then head over to my mods folder here, I'm going to type this, I'm going to search for this ID exactly. And as you can see, I have a folder for it and a .mod folder for it. Now what I'm going to do with these 2 is highlight them and then copy them, paste them directly into the servers folder for mods. Then we're going to go back and to the structures plus mod, which I'm using in this case. Then I'm going to find the mod ID. Let's see, in this case, it's right down here. Keep in mind, if you don't see the mod ID, what you can do is go up to the top here, click Steam, Settings, then you want to go to Interface right here, and you want to make sure that you've got this Display Steam URL address bar when available checked, and then the ID is just this right here. Okay, so then we're going to go back here, we're going to get this out of the way, and then I'm going to search for the structures plus ID. I'm going to highlight both of these, copy, and paste these over as well. Okay, now that they're both transferred over, I can just go ahead and close out of this. And then what we need to do is remember what the IDs for each of these mods are. So in this example, I've got this one, which is the structures plus one. So I'm going to open a notepad file and just paste this right in here. This is the one for, I believe, structures plus, right? And then we've got the additional emotes mod, which I'm going to put here. Now we need to head back out of the mods folder. We're going to go to saved, config, Windows Server, game user settings.ini, and as you can see, I just headed over to the server configuration. You can see this on the server configuration page under the game user settings.ini. There's a parameter for active mods right here. This is an integer because it includes just whole numbers, and so we're just gonna head over here, active mods, or what I copied exactly, and then equals, and then we want to include these mod IDs. So we're gonna do this mod ID and then comma, and then this mod ID, comma. And we need these all in one line. And then that's all it is. If you have more mods, you're going to, of course, need to copy the mod folder and then the .mod file to the server, of course, and then make sure you've got the IDs, and you can just paste them here. So if you have more, comma, number, comma, another number, or a string of numbers, and so on until you've added all of the mods. This essentially tells the server to actually include these mods when it starts up with them. Okay, so that was all of that stuff out of the way. Hopefully you understand. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment. I try and get to every single comment. Hopefully I've covered just about everything, but we're not done. Plugins are the last thing I want to cover, and it's actually something I've recently learned about, and plugins are super cool. They essentially, here, I'll sort of create an analogy for plugins. So I want to sort of explain the difference between a plugin and a mod, right? And so let's say a mod sort of weaves its way into the server itself and can create and add new content, new structures, new creatures, new additions to the map potentially. It could add another island to the island as sort of a separate expansion extension. Doesn't mean it's going to add a full-fledged island that extends the map or anything, but mods can add tangible content to the game. Now what plugins do is they sort of sit as a bit of a lighter addition to the server that will be able to make small little tweaks that can sometimes make a pretty big difference. There are all kinds of plugins that add super cool functionality, and so with that being said, let's get into how to install them. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is head over to Google and search ARK Server API. I'm going to leave a link in the description to this as well, but you're going to find the Server API website here, and then we want to go to Releases right here. Now, this might seem a little bit daunting. It was for me at first, but it's not at all hard, and it's generally not very invasive compared to mods, which are highly invasive if you want to compare them directly. So there's a sort of guide right here that explains how to do it yourself. But if you'd rather just follow along, essentially what we're going to do is first requirements. It says you need to download this. If you don't already have Microsoft Visual C++, download this. You're going to need it. And then that's really all you need to do. Other than that, you can click download. Then we're going to download this zip file with the ARK Server API. So we're going to head out of here, reject our mods. Okay, we've got our zip folder. Now what we need to do is essentially head back to our Win64, and we're going to take all of these, and for now I'm just going to put them on the desktop, and then I'm going to directly take them and cut them and move them to this Win64 folder. It would have been a little easier if I just dragged them directly over. Regardless, once these are in the Win64 folder, you'll notice there's an ARK API folder. So we've got a plugins folder within here, and we've got permissions, which is sort of, it's a plugin that comes pre-installed with it, which we're going to need because it sort of serves as the backbone for a lot of other plugins, or at least it's a necessary functionality. Now we're going to start up the island, and as you can see, there's some new green text, which is like super cool. This green text clarifies that yes, we are in fact using the server API. It's going to tell you the version that we're using. And it's going to say that it's successfully loaded the permissions plugin, assuming nothing has gone super wrong. Now, if we don't install any plugins beyond this and we just left it as is, once the server's up, it does add a new command, a command called /groups. So you can use this command to see what groups you're in, though it doesn't really add any sort of functionality on the surface, so you can't really do much with it. However, if you want to actually install plugins, we're going to go to the forum section. Then we're going to go to plugins right here. So this is where all of the plugins are. What you do need to understand is that a lot of these plugins actually cost money. You have to buy some of these plugins. For example, Make ARK Great Again, you have to buy a copy of this for 36 euros, which roughly translates to about $40 or $50. But some of them are free, some of them are open source. For example, Lethals, I think a lot of Lethals plugins are open source and they're totally free. And so there's different plugin developers will charge different amounts of money, or they won't charge at all. It just depends on whether or not they want to actually be paid for their work, because it is a lot of work to make these plugins. Okay, so I'm going to search for one of the most common plugins or commonly used plugins that I'm aware of, which is Shop, Currency, and Kits. It adds a bunch of new commands. It allows you to set up your own shop system. So I'm going to download this one. I've got the ARK shop right here. I'm going to drag the folder onto the desktop. And then what you want to do once you have a plugin is, it's really quite simple. You just head to the ARK API folder, go to plugins, and then you can just drag ARK Shop into the plugins section. Now, when you're using the server API and when you're using plugins, you're probably going to want to set up Archon. The reason you want to set up Archon is because without it, you can't actually issue commands to the server without being an admin in-game. Certain plugins require these commands to be issued in order to use them fully, and some of these plugins don't actually have in-game admin commands, they only have the Archon variant, and Archon is a totally whole other boat that you can set up through Battlemetrics. I would definitely recommend using Battlemetrics to set up your Archon. You do have to pay for it, but it's only like $5 a month. So you can either use the Archon client, which I'm not actually sure if this works. Seems like, okay, I'm guessing this tool has been abandoned by its dev, no support. Yeah, I'm not sure if this Archon tool works exactly, but like I said, Battlemetrics offers really good support that allows you to directly connect your server via Archon, and then you can sort of check on it from Battlemetrics wherever you are. I won't be explaining that in this video or in any in the future, but I just thought I'd mention it since you will need Archon if you want to fully make use of these plugins. Lastly, when it comes to plugins, typically you'll have a config file. Or a JSON config JSON file. And this might look really scary. This video will be way too long if I explain all of this stuff and how to use Archon. So for now, you will have to research that on your own if you're interested in using plugins, but this is sort of the basic gist of how to add them and how to set them up. So there you go. I don't even know how long this video is going to be. It may have been an hour long, it may have been an hour and 30 minutes long, or hopefully it's even less than an hour. But regardless, I hope that it helped you. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, if it helped you, please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And as always, good luck, survivors.